The best that the 20th century had to offer. A special tribute to the generation that fought and died to make the world safe for democracy. I'm Jane Pauley, and this is Time and Again.
The following program is brought to you in living color. Ladies and gentlemen, a good evening to you.
This is Lowell Thomas in New York.
The Beatles emerged off the earth.
Go, my fellow Americans!
I'm Chet Huntley, your host on...
We have 73 television cameras on Mayday Girl. President Nixon is actively...
One small step for man.
Hello and welcome to Time and Again. America's baby boom generation has been getting a lot of attention for a long time now, for more than half a century. From infancy to middle age, boomers have dominated American society, endlessly analyzed and catered to, often resented by the younger generation that's had to follow in their footsteps. We thought you might be ready for a break from all that. So on this episode of Time and Again, we pay tribute to the parents of the baby boomers, the 70 and 80-something generation who in their youth survived a Great Depression, won a World War, then went on to build America into the greatest superpower in history. We'll hear some amazing stories from the war that generation won, World War II, and meet some veterans of some of its greatest conflicts, from Pearl Harbor to D-Day and beyond. Let's begin with Tom Brokaw and some veterans of one of the fiercest, costliest battles of the war, Iwo Jima, a tiny Pacific island wrested from the Japanese by U.S. Marines after more than 3 weeks of fighting, beginning on February 19, 1945.
53 years ago,
There were body parts all over the place.
wave after wave of Marines hit the beaches of Iwo Jima.
Like somebody took a hot soldering iron and shoved it through you.
There, 23,000 Japanese soldiers, a torrent of mortar shells, hidden tunnels, deadly mines. A battle so fierce, a victory so costly. A moment in time that would forever join three young friends from Syracuse, New York.
We were in school together, grade school together, Boy Scouts together.
Now, they're in their 70s. Two enlisted, one was drafted. They went off to war separately and wondered, would they ever see each other again? Then, a storybook coincidence.
We all ended up in the same battalion, and that's quite unusual. As neighborhood buddies, as kids, here we are together.
It was a piece of home.
Comfort for three young men who had never been in battle.
You didn't know that much about it, so you didn't know enough to be scared.
Just too cocky. I was there to knock out a few of them.
But just 4 hours after hitting the treacherous beach, Fred found that courage alone was not enough.
He got in a big shell hole, and I was in one that was adjacent to it.
And I could see their faces, and boom, that thing hit. And all I could smell was burning flesh after that.
13 days later, Dave Osborne would be gunned down as well. Marty Connor fought without sleep for 36 days. American Marines winning a battle, losing their innocence. Almost 6,000 dead on that tiny Pacific island. Today, a leg brace reminds Fred of his injury. Did he run out of luck?
Oh, God. Wife and 5 kids and all the pool I've played. How much luck can you have? I'm satisfied.
Marty, he treats each day as a gift. He's still on ski patrol every winter.
There's more than luck to it, though. You know, I think that it wasn't the time that the good Lord wanted you, you know.
Dave owns a printing business, and though it may be subtle, he uses his war training every day.
By golly, I can do that, so I can do anything.
They've done more than just survive, these Marines, fathers, friends, but that war is never far away.
I'd say every year at the time of February the 19th, we think about Iwo.
It's something you can hold on to. You're not alone. We can reminisce and talk about things that we experienced together, and in the best of times and the worst of times.
The very best of a generation of Americans.
On February 17, 1945, just 2 days before U.S. Marines landed at Iwo Jima, American forces reclaimed another piece of Pacific real estate from the Japanese, the Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines. 3 years earlier, a small band of American soldiers had lost Bataan to the Japanese after holding out for 5 months without reinforcements. Out of food, out of ammunition, the Americans finally surrendered. Among them, a Notre Dame grad with a remarkable story to tell. Here's NBC's Bob Dotson.
The winter of life stirs memories. Mott Tonelli recalls kindness shining in a dark place.
American and Filipino troops are reported making a grim last-ditch stand.
56 years ago today, in 1942, Tonelli was an Army sergeant, only 25 years old, battling the Japanese in a steamy Philippine jungle.
We knew we couldn't win. We didn't have ammunition. The ammunition that we did have was old and there were duds.
Only 2 grenades in 25 worked. Finally, 12,000 GIs gave up. The largest single surrender in American history. Men too weak to defend themselves were made to march 70 miles.
You'd see them get shot. You'd see them get killed.
It was a death march. 10,000 American and Filipino soldiers would die. On the first day, a Japanese guard demanded Mott's class ring.
He kept pointing at it, and I said, no, I'm not going to give it to you. And a couple of guys said, Mott, give him the ring. He's going to kill you.
The soldier pressed his bayonet into Tonelli's neck. A life and death test of wills. Mott surrendered the ring. The Bataan Death March is not known for any act of kindness, but there was one because of something that happened 5 years before here in Notre Dame Stadium. Mott Tonelli was a fullback then with dazzling speed. 2 minutes left of the game against arch-rival University of Southern California. He ran 76 yards for a touchdown. It was a moment one USC student from Japan would never forget. 5 years later, on that jungle path, the student, now a Japanese Army officer, recognized Tonelli.
He said, did one of my men take anything from you? And I said, yes, he did. He reached in his pocket and he said, is this it?
Tonelli's Notre Dame ring.
He gave me the ring back.
Because he remembered one glorious run. The officer did something very special. He gave Mott back a piece of his life.
When you're talking about a war, you're talking about life.
That extraordinary gift helped Mott do something most of his buddies did not. He survived the ordeal with a ring and the memory of a single act of kindness.
When we come back, remembering the women of the war through the story of Army nurse June Wandry. And we'll meet GI Johnny Holmes, who fought more than Germans during World War II. These days, women can be found in just about every part of the U.S. Armed Services. That was far from the case during World War II. Back then, if you were a woman in uniform, you were almost certainly a nurse. June Wandry was one of them. NBC's Ann Thompson asked her to remember.
The words of war.
He had pieces of shrapnel in his skull.
In a sentence, June Wandry can go from her home in Portage, Michigan to the battlefields of Europe, where she served as an Army nurse in World War II.
Bed 4, massive penetrating wounds of abdomen.
Words and images June forgot until she found her letters home, 40 years after she wrote them, all in a box saved by her mother.
I had forgotten the vast majority of material that was in it. I think you bury it.
Why did you feel compelled to join the Army?
I never thought about it. Really, I didn't. I just went.
Only 22, June served in North Africa, Italy, France, Germany, working in a field hospital following the front lines. A bedpan commando, one soldier called her. She made it the title of her book, a collection of her letters and diaries.
What were the living conditions like?
Rotten.
They had no heat, showers, or sleep. They ate sea rations, and when they could, dry cleaned their uniforms in airplane fuel.
I don't know if we ever cleaned these. I think we just aired them.
Over 3 years, she endured malaria, hepatitis, pneumonia. She never complained.
They don't need some sour grapes hanging over them. They need somebody to cheer them up and to make them feel happy and to make them have hope.
There was one soldier who I believe described your smile as a field of sunflowers.
Yes, that's Sammy.
Sammy. June never learned his last name in the 3 days she took care of him. He haunts her still, she says, cracking jokes and singing, trying to survive chest and stomach wounds from a grenade.
Despite Sammy's desperate battle to live, he slipped away just as morning broke. It broke my heart. He was every young man that went over there, was drafted or not drafted or volunteered to go, that went over there, and his life was wasted.
Every nurse had a Sammy. In all, more than 70,000 nurses put on uniforms to save the men who fought to save the world.
I think they brought a lot of comfort to the soldier who was wounded. I think that was the big thing. They were going to be safe.
What June tried to forget, the letters remember. Words of war. How one generation sacrificed so the next might be saved.
The U.S. military today is a model of racial integration. President Harry Truman saw to that, but not until after World War II. Black Americans serving in that war often had to fight on two fronts. Here's NBC's Fred Francis.
Loud noise, a hard snow, wet feet still bring back haunting memories for Johnny Holmes of the bloody winter of '45 when he fought his way across Europe. Like millions of GIs, combat is still the defining event in his life.
Each time your stomach knocks up, but the moment that first shot is fired, all fear leaves.
Holmes and his black unit, the 761st, battled both Germans and racism. A segregated America didn't trust blacks on the front lines.
The prevailing view was that Negro soldiers couldn't fight.
That's right. That was it.
But Holmes' unit was there. So proud of their service, Holmes and his war buddies Lawrence Bailey, 80, and John Holt, 76, wore uniforms to meet us.
They expected the black troops to fail. They'd run. They wouldn't stand up and fight.
The white soldiers and officers told the villagers, those niggers ain't up there. They're just fighting. They're just bringing the tanks up for the white boys to fight with.
The 761st slugged it out with German units for 183 straight days of heavy combat. They earned the respect of whites and praise from a leader they admired, General George Patton.
He said, I don't care what color you are, as long as you kill them damn Krauts.
Patton called on the 761st dozens of times after it proved its mettle in the Battle of the Bulge, helping to rescue a division cut off by a German attack. Even that enemy respected him.
This German major said to me, and he shot the living hell out of me, he says, why are you over here fighting? He said, this is a white man's war.
Gentlemen, was it a white man's war?
I think it was America's war.
Yeah. It's amazing 50 years later you're still so filled with pride that you see it.
Don't you know, when you get over there and the nation's in trouble, you ain't got no black and white. You got just American.
Mm-hmm.
Historians say the men of the 761st fought with great distinction. They say they fought as equals and then some.
When Time and Again continues in a moment, America goes to war. How an entire generation mobilized for the war effort more than half a century ago. When America entered World War II, it sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sailors, and Marines to fight all over the world. But it also mobilized back home, building a war machine unparalleled in history. NBC's John Chancellor filed this report in December 1991, marking the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
But, truth to tell, the United States was in the war before the Japanese attack. 3 months before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy started fighting an undeclared war against German submarines in the Atlantic. 9 months before Pearl Harbor, American war supplies had begun to flow to Britain, a clear move against the Axis. So that well before Pearl Harbor, military production and Allied purchases of American products were stimulating the economy and putting people back to work. The Depression was ending. Art Hughes, who worked in a factory in Michigan.
There was a lot of excitement in the sense of the war effort and helping the war effort. What can we do to support our country?
Production was the key, of course. Production would win the war.
The biggest of all orders ever given to American industry.
3 million women working day and night in the war plants. 5 million tons of bombs. 13 million pairs of boots to Russia. 15 million men and women in uniform. 20 million small arms. And one man in the White House leading it all.
We are all in it, all the way. It will not only be a long war, it will be a hard war. That is the basis on which we now lay all our plans. That is the yardstick by which we measure just what we shall need and demand. Money, materials, doubled and quadrupled production, ever increasing.
Let's remember Pearl Harbor as we go through the cold. Let's remember Pearl Harbor as we see the Alamo.
And so the great American war effort, the mobilization of the entire population, the creation of a new culture, wartime.
We've got another bond to buy.
Movie stars by the carload selling the war bonds that soaked up inflation. Jimmy Stewart, Clark Gable, and heavyweight champ Joe Louis joining up. And propaganda would make Americans work and fight.
Averaging only 5 feet 3 in height and 117 pounds in weight, the Japanese soldier is expected to compensate for his small size by his fanaticism in battle.
There was a fever of hate and fear of the Japanese. And in 1942, 75,000 American citizens of Japanese extraction, American citizens, were sent to internment camps where they would be kept for 3 years. There was no internment for German Americans or Italian Americans. Columnist James Reston.
There was no outcry among the people. Indeed, there were only a few voices within the Roosevelt administration who objected.
We are going to win this war, and we are going to win the peace that follows.
Roosevelt was an astonishingly effective wartime president who had the ability to define a goal, the defeat of Germany and Japan, and then to lead the country toward that goal. Historian Arthur Schlesinger.
And he was, of course, a tremendously eloquent speaker. He'd established the confidence of most Americans in his fight against the Depression. And he was, of course, also a very resourceful politician. He was a man whose stance here was a cripple who nonetheless had the gallantry and the humor and the courage. And all his sons were in the war. This was a great example to the American people.
The attack on Pearl Harbor brought the enormous engine of American productivity up to full speed. It was more powerful than the economies of Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. And in the end, it prevailed. The day the war began was the day we began to win it.
Pearl Harbor marked America's official entry into a war it had been unofficially fighting for months. Not just against the Japanese, but against Nazi Germany as well. American veterans remember the European front when Time and Again continues.
Dust itself suffered under a continuous pounding from heavy German artillery, from self-propelled guns, and for 4 nights from an air bombing, which was really a terrible thing to suffer. The main square was full of destroyed vehicles and rubble and rocks and bricks and mortar and so forth. And some of the guns were down to 10 rounds. If we didn't have a replenishment of ammunition, I knew that we couldn't hold for many more days.
A U.S. veteran 20 years later remembering the 1944 German siege of Bastogne in Belgium. The Allied defense of Bastogne was crucial in winning World War II's greatest engagement on the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge. NBC's Richard Ross paid a visit to Bastogne in 1994, 50 years after the Battle of the Bulge.
In Bastogne tonight, they celebrated the triumph with a sound and light show, honoring the army that liberated the town and pushed back the bulge Hitler's assault had produced along Allied lines 50 years ago. This is where General Anthony McAuliffe said nuts when the Nazis demanded surrender. The war didn't end here, someone said today, but this is where the battle for Europe was won.
Almost 20,000 American soldiers were killed in the Battle of the Bulge. Another 60,000 were wounded, missing, or captured. The men who write military history call it the greatest battle the U.S. Army ever fought.
But today, the memories of the men who made that military history through 44 days of bloodshed and bitter cold were memories less of greatness than of despair.
I've wanted to come back. For a long time, I really didn't want to think about the war.
Walter Carr was a 23-year-old lieutenant from Arkansas.
We were uncomfortable all the time, and we were afraid all the time because we were getting shot at every day.
50 years ago, he led a platoon across German lines and helped break the siege of Bastogne. What he remembers most is the horror.
We were functioning as animals, just wanting to survive. You've seen these pictures of men in combat. They've got this blank stare in their face, and they've just become animals, hoping that they will survive.
The survivors who came back today, blanketed against the cold, were told they changed history here. Belgians said to Americans, "We'll never forget what you did." A soldier who fought here said, "It's a memory that needs no prompting." Even 50 years later, it doesn't go away.
Up next, the story of Hitler's dark legacy, as Time and Again special presentation on World War II continues on MSNBC.
Welcome back to Time and Again as we remember some of the true heroes of the 20th century, the American generation that fought and won World War II. That war had plenty of milestones, turning points, and key battles. But one day in the war stands apart, D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy and the beginning of the end of Hitler's Third Reich. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, NBC's Fred Francis reunited two veterans who hadn't seen each other since they'd hit the beaches of Normandy. It's a story of a friendship renewed and a haunting secret revealed.
Machine guns and the small arms fire were coming down with such ferocity, it was unbelievable.
Invading Normandy's Omaha Beach was supposed to be the kind of perilous mission that forged lifetime friendships.
There's death all around. You move, you get shot. A couple of guys tried it, and bingo, they got it.
But on bloody Omaha that day, before the sun warmed the sand, men watched their best friends die in incomprehensible numbers.
They were just hitting all around us. We had to get off that beach to stay alive.
Pals they had trained and fought with for years perished at water's edge.
We were just slaughtered. We were literally cut to pieces.
What happened to best buddies Herb and Jess that day would change their lives forever.
I see bodies floating in the water, upside down, with just the packs.
I saw a lot of men go down. Yes, sir. But we got off the beach. We were lucky.
Herb Siegel was very lucky. A college student before the war, he had fought for 2 years before D-Day. And his best buddy, Jess Weiss, who'd worked as a cashier in a New York automat before being drafted, was lucky too. They were anonymous heroes, brothers, best friends who had bonded fighting their way through the toughest battles of the war, North Africa, Sicily, yet haven't seen each other in almost 50 years. Jess is officially a hero, with silver stars, bronze stars, and a Purple Heart. But privately, he is tormented by what he did on bloody Omaha on that day, his own horrible secret. A stroll on the vast Normandy shoreline today is a haunting search, and this trip a quest for absolution.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen, the eyes of the world are upon you.
Operation Overlord, which began on D-Day, depended on 175,000 men taking the 5 beaches of Normandy. What did your officers tell you before the landing?
They told us that the air power that we have, the ships out there with the howitzer, with the guns, we're going to take care of everything. We're going to knock it all out completely.
But these German defenses were hardly touched. The bombers missed their targets, and the shells from the battleships could not dent that thick German concrete. So when the GIs, seasick and weary, waded through the dawn surf, they were cut to pieces by more than 4 dozen big German cannon and more than 80 machine gun nests. Herb's hell began with the friends around him. Of 37 GIs in his landing craft, only 13 survived. Seared into Jess's memory are images of close friends blown up and decapitated right beside him.
When you're going through combat, when you're going through something like that, you got to stay alive.
How'd you stay alive?
I stayed alive by being scared, damn scared. I felt this was it, and I saw my life. This was it.
Jess has hid away for 50 years what he did then. In many ways, life stopped for him, but that is why he is back here now. In all, more than 2,000 Americans died on Omaha before the sun set. Many are buried on a bluff overlooking the coastline where they fell.
Any names you remember?
Jess walked among their graves with his stepdaughter, Susan. He greeted old friends, foxhole mates, the comrades that all infantrymen fight hard for, are willing to die for.
You were in the 1st Division?
1st Division. Look for the 16th Infantry and D-Day.
Vandenberg?
Yeah. There was a guy we called Vandy. Could have been him. Vandy. Never knew where they were from. Never knew anything.
Didn't have time to ask.
Never had a chance to raise a family. Become a grandfather.
Well, we're lucky we got you.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Alone with his secret, Jess has also carried the guilt of a survivor, cradling that too for 5 decades.
So why now? You walk through, why are you doing this?
Because what you see here, I just missed being here, and only God knows.
You miss being one of them?
Yeah. I was supposed to be here. But I'm here. You know, wars are not about who's right, but what's left. And I'm one that's left. There's 2 others like us.
Herb, so unlike Jess, left his troubled friend after the war and didn't look back. He married Lily, his wartime sweetheart, worked as a printer, raised a family, then retired to the world of condos and a bowling league in Boca Raton. For someone not burdened with guilt or seeking closure like his buddy Jess, Herb's pursuit of the memories would soon evoke a catharsis 50 years in the making that surprised even him. It began here in Normandy when we reunited Herb with Jess. Herb came because he was finally ready to remember. Jess had dreamed of and sought this reunion for years.
Good to see it. Good to see it. Oh, good to see it, kid. Really good to see it. You know, I dug all your foxholes. We made it. We made it. Good. Well, you see, we made it. You're right.
The conclusion of this remarkable D-Day remembrance as Jess Weiss reveals his long-held secret when Time and Again continues. We return now to June 1994, Fred Francis's 50th anniversary remembrance of D-Day. and the reunion of two very different veterans of that epic struggle, Jess Weiss and Herb Siegel.
In the hours to follow, there was an undercurrent to the talk of family and the pictures of offspring and grandchildren. Herb felt within Jess the crippling images he had managed to put aside for a lifetime. Overcome with affection and sympathy, Herb realized why he had not slept well in the month prior to this meeting. He, too, was finally remembering how awful, how unspeakable it really was.
You hear the bullets just singing right past you, over your head, on the side. They just...
Did you actually see a whole group of your friends get machine gunned at one time?
A lot of them, yes.
How were you able to stand on this beach, overlooking this water, and be so calm about it after...
Well, 50 years is a long time, you know. I guess inside I'm not really calm, you know. I lost a lot of friends on that beach. A lot of friends.
You buried it for so long.
I know, I buried it for 50 years. I had to get on with my life.
Jess, too, got on with his life, building a successful insurance business. But life had never been the same for him after D-Day. Back in Normandy, he was now ready to confront the secret he had carried for half a century of how he really survived on that beach that day.
Well, combat is you look for cover. You were trained. A tree, a rock, anything. There was nothing. This beach is the cleanest beach I've ever seen. Nothing but pure, pristine sand. It was.
So your cover was?
I fell down. I was so tired, so exhausted. And I covered myself with a few of the bodies.
Jess kept a diary to remind him what he had done, with words as cutting as the shell fire of that day.
It says in your diary,
yeah,
you wrote on that day, on the beach about 6 hours.
Yeah.
My eyes have seen, may my memory fail to remember.
Yeah. I told no one. I couldn't tell anyone. That's something I regret because it's haunted me for years.
Do you feel like you're a coward for doing that?
Huh. Yeah.
Jess, is that why you were looking for Herb Siegel?
I'll tell you why. Who the hell can you talk about this experience? The old saying is, if you have my moccasins on, you can understand what I'm saying. Who else could understand what I'm talking about but somebody who went through it with you? That's why I had to find Herb Siegel.
But now Jess could tell Herb of the demons he could not shake, of his crushing fear on D-Day, things he could not tell Herb in 1944. Herb listened and understood and told Jess it was okay. And as they shared the past together, for Jess, the pain was now not as sharp. At the seashore monument to their war, their battle, on a cold gray morning in May, they shared a moment that only old soldiers can, when they see the names of their comrades.
It's Duckworth. First Lieutenant Duckworth. See him up there?
Oh, yeah, it is Duckworth.
It was a last goodbye to pals who did not make it off Omaha Beach.
There's Lepore.
Oh, there's my boy.
Raymond Lepore. Yeah, he was a corporal. Yeah, that's him. That was Lepore. Yeah.
You owe me 21 pounds, buddy. On the ship coming over, you know, we were...
You loaned him 21 pounds?
I loaned him 21 pounds. He's up. I'll pay you back, don't worry.
Yeah.
He still owes it to me.
A lot of names up there. A lot of names. A lot of names.
Views of the other side, from Imperial Japan to Nazi Germany, when we return in a moment.
There is a place in Tokyo called the Yasukuni Shrine, where the spirits of the war dead are worshipped. They would number 2.5 million by the end of World War II. Then, as now, the Japanese viewed themselves as victims rather than aggressors, believing that the war was not something that Japan should be blamed for, but rather something that was bound to happen. Shikata Gana, fate.
NBC's George Lewis on Japan in World War II. Wartime propaganda demonized America's enemies. They were Japs and Krauts, and it was easy to imagine them as less than human. They certainly did the same to us. In the years after the war, Japan and Germany became America's allies. But forgiveness did not come easily. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, German officials were not invited to the ceremonies at Normandy. But many German veterans did attend. NBC's Keith Miller spoke with one of them.
He has spent the past 50 years trying to forget the war and the Allied invasion that helped to end it. Reinhold Schmidt, 69, returned to Normandy with other German veterans to remember and make friends with an old enemy. Schmidt's 6th Parachute Regiment fought one of the bloodiest battles of Normandy against the American 90th Infantry Division at Utah Beach.
You could feel the power. You could see the Air Force. I saw the warships. I thought, what's this?
The Germans lost 500,000 dead or missing trying to repel the invasion. Of the 140 men in Schmidt's unit, he is one of 3 to have survived the battle. American veterans of the 90th Infantry honored the German dead at a cemetery where more than 20,000 Germans are buried. Schmidt's regiment is respected by the GIs because they honored a ceasefire so wounded Americans could be evacuated. The gesture has never been forgotten.
Today we are friends.
Schmidt remembers another moment of mercy when he had a GI in his sights.
I saw his eyes. I saw his total face. But I couldn't bring it down. It was impossible for me to kill one who does nothing.
In the village of Perrier, a few miles from where they fought against each other, they gathered to remember. And they found it possible to come together.
Never happened again.
It takes courage to forgive, especially when the memories of Normandy are so painful on all sides, even after 50 years. Keith Miller, NBC News, Normandy.
The legacy of World War II and the American generation that fought it, when time and again continues.
Up next, the story of Hitler's dark legacy as Time and Again special presentation on World War II continues on MSNBC.
World War II transformed America, turning a still young, isolationist country into a global superpower. And it transformed the generation that fought the war, forcing them to grow up quickly, endure hardship and sacrifice, and return to an America far different than the one they left home to defend.
The Japanese have just officially laid down their arms.
Kiss me once and kiss me twice and kiss me once again. It's been a long, long time.
The 12 million veterans came back to a country transformed. The war was over, and so was the Depression. Consumers went on a spending spree. Inflation soared. There were riots over nylons, even at $5 a pair. Warplanes were scrapped, and in their place, assembly lines turned out cars, washing machines, refrigerators. The birth rate went up by 20%, the baby boom. On Long Island, Bill Levitt cleared potato fields and planted 4-room homes. They sold for $7,990. And the returning veterans were on the move. Soupy Holmes went from a submarine in the Pacific back to his old Chicago factory job. But he wanted more. So he moved to California and enrolled in college.
Without the GI Bill, I probably would have never gone on to college.
Holmes and 8 million other veterans took advantage of the GI Bill. Higher education was no longer the privilege of a few, and the workplace was transformed by the organization man. Life was changing in other ways on the home front. During the war, millions of women left the kitchen to work in defense plants. Betty Murphy was a real-life Rosie the Riveter. She drilled rivets at the Douglas Aircraft Plant in Long Beach.
There's Rosie the Riveter. But it was a neat song, and it kind of made us feel proud, made us feel good. And you didn't mind having your hair all tied up or wearing coveralls, you know.
But when the war ended, the veterans wanted their jobs back.
The impression that the women got was that they appreciated our efforts to help them, you know, during the war. But please go home now and take care of your families.
By 1950, however, there were a third more women working than a decade earlier, even though they still earned only half a man's salary. And American family life was reshaped by a new force.
Millions of families in the hinterlands of America are wondering when they will get television.
And television brought us news as well about a new war, the Cold War.
These are Russian soldiers, young, not bad looking, but taught from childhood a doctrine of hate and fear.
The Cold War had many fronts and many villains.
Anyone who has followed the communist conspiracy, and it's a war which we've been losing.
It was, ironically, a time of great anxiety about events abroad to go with a great prosperity at home. America had a new role.
We went from the late 1920s, or the early 1930s, when we were a stridently isolationist country, to a country which was front and center stage in the world. One of the clear changes in 1945 is that U.S. history, at that point, becomes world history.
It was a new world for American blacks as well. During the war, they were not allowed to fight on the front lines. They were kept in segregated units. Alexander Jefferson was a pilot with the elite Tuskegee Airmen. He was one of the few blacks allowed to become an officer. Jefferson was shot down over France. He spent 9 months in a German prison camp, and he had mixed feelings about coming home.
I knew that I was coming back into a society in which black males were always treated as boys. You never became a man.
Jefferson thinks the war gave black veterans courage to change that.
We found out who we were. We are men like anyone else. Of course it changed our attitude. It changed our position of mind.
He became one of Detroit's first black teachers, then a principal. Now retired, he teaches a new generation about the ordeal and the contributions of black veterans.
I was tail end Charlie. Tail end Charlie, the last ship to go across the target.
For Alexander Jefferson and his generation, black and white, World War II defined the rest of their lives. They changed the world, first on the battlefield, then when they came marching home. They gave us the good life. It is an enduring and instructive legacy.
The generation that gave us the good life did so by foregoing that life themselves, at least temporarily. The Depression, World War II, the Cold War, all meant hardship and sacrifice. The values at stake were worth fighting for, worth dying for. And if Americans now in their 70s and 80s sometimes wonder what's become of the world they fought to save, they can take comfort in the fact that the values they championed, freedom, prosperity, democracy, now dominate the world as it approaches the 21st century. That's time and again for now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jane Pauley, and we're history.
The thoughts and hopes of all America, indeed of all the civilized world, are centered tonight on the battleship Missouri. There, on that small piece of American soil, anchored in Tokyo Harbor, the Japanese have just officially laid down their arms. This night of total victory, we salute you of the armed forces of the United States, wherever you may be. What a job you have done. We are all waiting for the day when you will be home with us again. Good luck, and God bless you.
We are the sons and daughters of the world they saved. Now our moment for common cause has come. It is up to us to ensure a world of peace and prosperity for yet another generation.